All right, let's see if I can get this to work this time. So this is the super short lecture about split brain procedures. So the brain, we call it plasticity. It means that your brain has the ability to change itself or alter itself after types of injury or illness, or just in general, our brain is plastic, meaning that it can change form, or we can utilize new connections or maybe change connections when we're trying to do a certain behavior. Our brain is adaptable. It's always trying to change. It's always trying to live up to what we want to happen and fix our skills. So if you were to suffer from like a traumatic brain injury and it messed up some kind of behavior you used to be able to elicit, your brain can attempt to repair that area and to carve new neural pathways there to kind of help you out so you can go back to being able to do this thing. You just have to create a new route for it. So this video, if it works on this slide, is a great example of what we mean when we talk about neuroplasticity and what it is going to look like. So let's see if my video will work. There we go.
Not so long ago, many scientists believed that the brain did not change after childhood, that it was hardwired and fixed by the time we became adults. But recent advances in only the last decade now tell us that this is simply not true. The brain can and does change throughout our lives. It is adaptable, like plastic. Hence, neuroscientists call this neuroplasticity. How does neuroplasticity work? If you think of your brain as a dynamic, connected power grid, there are billions of pathways or roads lighting up every time you think, feel, or do something. Some of these roads are well-traveled. These are our habits, our established ways of thinking, feeling, and doing. Every time we think in a certain way, practice a particular task, or feel a specific emotion, we strengthen this road. It becomes easier for our brains to travel this pathway. Say we think about something differently. Learn a new task, or choose a different emotion. We start carving out a new road. If we keep traveling that road, our brains begin to use this pathway more, and this new way of thinking, feeling, or doing becomes second nature. The old pathway gets used less and weakens. This process of rewiring your brain by forming new connections and weakening old ones is neuroplasticity in action. The good news is that we all have the ability to learn and change by rewiring our brains. If you have ever changed a bad habit or thought about something differently, you have carved a new pathway in your brain and experienced neuroplasticity firsthand. With repeated and directed attention towards your desired change, you can rewire your brain.
So this one is like a direct showing you have the ability to but so like my mom, she had a traumatic brain injury years ago, and one of the things was her short-term memory was real rough shape, and she could not smell anything but like the smell of smoke, and all food tasted like it had come off of a smoker. And so that was her state for about a whole year of her life after the injury. And what happened though is her brain over the course of a year started repairing itself and carving out these, different pathways to help her with memory, but also repairing itself so that her sense of smell and taste did come back. So your brain has these amazing abilities to try to help heal itself or just restructure itself. Now, your book did talk about the idea of lesioning the brain, right? When you looked at the different types of brain scans that can be done. So when it comes to lesionings of the brain, it means like removing or destroying part of the brain. So it could be like there's a tumor that's in there, so we have to take out the tumor and part of the brain maybe that surrounds it to get a clear like cut. Also, another example of destroying an area of the brain would be split brain surgery. And so in this surgery, people will have their corpus callosum, that bridge that connects the two hemispheres together and lets them talk. You cut it in half. And what they do this for is if somebody has really severe epilepsy, this kind of quiets down. It stops the seizures from happening. kind of the way I understand it is that when somebody has epilepsy, what they notice is the two hemispheres just have so much activity going on that when they are crossing over at the corpus callosum, it like gets overwhelmed. Like there's too much, too many action potentials, that electricity going back and forth and collides, and it gets mixed up and it creates a seizure. If you cut their brain in half, cut this corpus callosum, it stops that interference. And when that interference stops, so do their seizures. So it's beneficial to people who have severe epilepsy after they've tried medications to see if all that's ever. It's kind of like a last effort to something very severe. Now, when we talk about the divided brain, right, they started talking about how, like, in the 60s, they had this dominant brain thing with, like, the left hemisphere does this, the right hemisphere does that. Honestly, what I want you to look at is the bold words on the bottom here. Left hemisphere, what you need to know is the left hemisphere does language. That is all about our ability for speaking language and receiving and understanding language. It's all on the left side of our brain. Right? And so we talked about the speech areas like the Broca's and the Wernicke's. They're both only on the left hemisphere because it deals with language. LL, left language. The right side of the brain is visual spatial and also facial recognition. So this is our ability to like recognize pictures, but also recognize when there's a facial structure in something or just recognize faces in general. Okay. And so the reason we know this stuff more severely is because we can test it on split brain patients. So what they do is, here's a picture of the corpus callosum. If we kind of move everything else out of the way, trim the top of the brain off. This is the band of neural fibers are right here. And what happens is they just cut through the whole thing and it severs the two hemispheres from talking to each other. For the most part, the patient, they can live a very normal life after that. But in these clinical studies, we realize they do have some deficits that are left. But we use the deficits for our study, which it lets us show what the right versus the left hemisphere, what each of them is more specified towards and what they're better at. So if we look here, I can't move that. So we have the left visual field and the right visual field. The left visual field goes to the right side of the brain, and the right visual field goes to the left side of the brain. And so what happens is each side, since they're specific about things, this side produces speech. So we can verbally say what is in the left hemisphere. So whatever's in the right goes to the left, they can speak it. Over here, it's the visual areas of the left field in the right hemisphere. The right, it can do things like point and draw what it sees. But if it doesn't communicate with the left, it doesn't have the ability to find the word, the speech for this pencil. When we look at this, we know if we did this experiment, we would say I saw an apple and a pencil because your right hemisphere has this picture, but because our two hemispheres are connected here with the corpus callosum, this left side gets a peek at what's over here and it can say, oh, that's a pencil. I knew that. It can compare notes. Now, in class, we did this activity, or if you didn't, here you can try it yourself. If you grab a writing utensil in each hand, simultaneously look straight ahead and try to draw a circle with one and a square with the other at the same time. Do it in one fast fluid motion. Just like if you drew a square normally or a circle, you just kind of go and do it in one fluid motion. Try to do this with both hands simultaneously. And what you'll find is it's super difficult to do. It's not going to work out in your favor. Your shapes are going to be really wonky and lopsided and probably going to be these solid mixes of square and circular features all in these weird shapes. And that's because one side is trying to do a square, one is trying to do a circle, and your two sides of your brain are trying to send these messages, and they're colliding in the corpus callosum. It's confusing you. Now, somebody with split brain, like this guy, when he does these, and we'll show in the video, he can do them perfectly. He does not have any issues drawing two different shapes with both hands independently because his brain, there's no interference. The two sides are not interfering with each other in what they're doing. Now, the weird part, this is like a cool trick they can do, but something they have a deficit in. If somebody with an intact corpus callosum had this thing, this HEART flash on the screen, we said, stare at the red dot. They stared at it, we flashed this up, and then we said, hey, what'd you see? We would say heart. If you do that with somebody with a divided or a split corpus callosum, a cut one, they do not respond with heart. So the he, it's in the left visual field, so it goes to the right side of the brain. Art is in the right visual field, so it goes to the left side of the brain. Left is language, okay? So only the left side, which can speak, It saw art. So when you verbally ask the person, what did you see? They will only respond with the art. Because the left side, it doesn't talk to the right anymore because it's been cut in half. It never gets the message that this was seen over in the right hemisphere. And the right doesn't have language, so we can't respond. So what did you see? Art. Now, if you ask them to point with their left hand which word they saw, they would actually point to the he. And the reason that this is because their left hand over here is controlled by their right side of the brain, and the right side of the brain is aware that this is what they saw. They just can't verbally say it. Okay? So we're going to watch a video of them doing this, and it kind of does a better job of explaining. So this is a Scientific American video. So here's your show host over here. This guy, he was in the article you were supposed to read by Gazzaniga. This is him. This is Gazzaniga. He did the split brain research with another person, and that's his most notable thing. He realized that language resides on the left side of the brain specifically in almost all humans, and then you have this visual spatial stuff on the right hemisphere. So we're going to fast forward to get to the part where we show our host drawing squiggles and it not working so well.
I found out how true that was right away when I was asked to draw a different shape with each hand. In a brain like mine, roughly speaking normal, at least all in one piece, the left half of my brain controls the right side of my body, while the right brain controls the left side. But because the two halves are connected, nothing wrong with that. Getting each hand to work independently isn't easy.
Well, we're saying, in fact, that Alan's hemispheres are connected, and that the motor messages from one are confusing the motor messages in the other.
I was just drawing an upside-down duck. Okay. But when Joe is given the same task, his two hands operate as if controlled by two separate brains. What's happening is that each half of Joe's brain is given a separate instruction. He's asked to fix his eyes on the cross in the center of the screen. Anything flashing to the right of the cross goes only to his left hemisphere. Things to the left go to his right hemisphere. Because the two don't communicate, each hand does only what its half of the brain sees. It's really like two different people doing the same thing.
That's right. That's the idea. Hey, Joe, I want you to keep your hands up.
In an experiment that's now a classic in brain research, Mike Gazzaniga over 30 years ago used a similar setup to find out if the two halves of the brain are specialized to do different things.
Sure.
Joe is being flashed a word only to one half of his brain. Words flashed to the right are seen only by his left brain, and Joe can report seeing those words just fine.
Good.
But when a word is flashed to his right brain,
Didn't see that. Okay. So I'm going to ask you
but now watch what happens.
to draw that with your left hand. Make it a little close to. Why don't you try drawing another picture over here if that'll help you. Oh, okay.
It's almost as though somebody has given him a secret communication. That's right. How he knows that it's a telephone. Up until then, he was blind.
Exactly.
When Gazzaniga first did this experiment, it instantly proved that the ability to speak resides almost exclusively in the left hemisphere. Not until he sees what his right brain is drawing is Joe able to name it.
He said church, after looking at the picture.
But he had to figure out about as long as we did. That's really interesting. It's a picture here of somebody communicating almost with another person.
Communication is not occurring inside the head, it's occurring out on the piece of paper.
So far, Joe has been seeing only one word. Things get even stranger when he's flashed two words, each to only one half of his brain.
So, toadstool. I'm finding out students don't really usually know what this word means. A toadstool is like a mushroom. So if we had seen that, we would have drawn like this tiny little mushroom. But because stool is in the right visual field, it goes to the left hemisphere. And then because the toad part is in the left visual field, it will go to the right hemisphere.
The right hemisphere saw a toad.
Yeah. And so his left hand draws a toad.
So there's the toad.
Oh, it's a toad. And this time I was able to guess what was coming.
Now put a little three-legged stool in there.
Joe's speaking left brain saw a stool. Saying the word lets the hand that's controlled by his right brain in on the signal. That's great.
So, because his left hemisphere saw stool written, right, he has to verbally say it out loud. For us, we could just mentally think, oh, stool. But the left side of my brain would be thinking about stool. And internally, I can't tell my right side that's what I saw. I can't have those internalized thoughts because my left and right don't talk to each other anymore. So he has to verbally say stool out loud. And then his right hemisphere is like, oh, I heard the word stool because that's my hearing's still fine. And then it can tell once his right hemisphere has heard the word stool said out loud, then his right hemisphere can tell his left hand to include a stool in the picture.
That's really interesting. And if he had seen that with the corpus callosum intact, he would have drawn a toadstool.
Right. Not a toad in a stool. Right, exactly the point. I've been doing this for 35 years. Yeah. And it gets me every time.
Yeah, it must. This time, instead of naming the word, I want you to point to the word.
Again, Joe sees two words simultaneously. Bell goes to his non-speaking right brain. Music to his speaking left brain. When asked to point to a picture of what he saw, he chooses Bell. But when asked why,
Why did you pick that one?
Music.
and when asked to explain,
Was music down? It was a few minutes ago. Last time I heard any music was coming from the bells out here. Banging away.
So the bell's outside here.
So, we're putting an end to me.
what's extraordinary is that Joe's speaking left brain concocts a plausible story of why he pointed the bell, even when some of the other pictures more obviously represent music. Gazzaniga believes this determination to find cause and effect, this desire to explain, is the left hemisphere's most marvelous property.
One of the unique things in the human brain is this need to interpret why two events occurred. What was the antecedent to this? What caused this? And if you can imagine that a species like us that has that little chip in its brain that asks those questions is going to survive rather well, because it's going to figure out more about the nature of the world than a species that doesn't have it.
Okay, Joe, I want you to keep
But as I was about to discover, the right brain has a very useful survival skill all its own. What do you think will happen here?
For you, we're doing it live experiment. Never done it before.
The experiment involves the 16th century Italian painter Arcimboldo, who made faces out of fruit, flowers, meat, even books. From other research, there's reason to believe that the ability to recognize faces is located exclusively in the right hemisphere. So Mike wondered if Arcimboldo's paintings would look different to each of Joe's two brains.
So will his left hemisphere say, I saw a potato, I didn't see a face? And will his right hemisphere say, I saw the face, and not comment on the fact it was made out of a potato?
You're going to see a figure followed by a choice of two words.
This works. It'll be terrific. We'll see. So here it is, live.
Okay. The first painting goes to the right hemisphere. And Joe points to face. The next painting goes to his left brain. And this time he points to fruits. Mike seems pleased.
Are you having a moment?
Again to the right brain. And Joe sees it as a face.
Right down.
But to the left brain,
Face made out of books. Books. It's unbelievable. He's doing it. You see that?
it's going so fast, it's shifting from left to right so fast, they can't keep up with you. You're just looking at that.
When you show a face in the right side, the left hemisphere,
Yeah.
he's focusing in on the elements made up of the face. When you show them the exact same picture in the left field, or the right hemisphere is focusing on the face and not the elements. She came down from another planet.
So, the fact that in class I'm teaching you that the right hemisphere does facial recognition, it's because this experiment that you just watched first time right here, okay? These split brain patients give us the opportunity to see what the left does independently and what the right does independently. Remember, ethics, we can't go in and be like, hey, we're going to remove somebody's right hemisphere and just see what happens and what they can and cannot do. Can't do that. So this is a really good opportunity where somebody had it done for a helpful purpose, for a medical condition, but they also have these changes occur because of a lack of communication. So it's always this really cool experiment. It's weird, but it's also really cool. So when we look at this stuff, the bottom line from this is people with intact brains, they also show these differences, right? So the thing I think of is we talked about transcranial magnetic stimulation, TMS, when we talked about therapies. And I talked to you about how my aunt messed around with one on my brain this last summer and how she could go over to one side of my brain. And if she wanted to, she didn't want to mess with it because she was afraid it would cause damage. But she could have scanned over my Broca's area in my left hemisphere and altered my ability to speak, which I think would have been cool. But, you know, she thought it might be risky. But it shows that our left and our right sides do have different abilities and different purposes to some extent. Now, with an intact corpus callosum, it's kind of interchangeable. We almost can't tell too much which side we're using when, but note that there are key differences to each side of the brain. So that's it for split brain. Hopefully this helped kind of explain it a little more. I think it is one of the trickier things when it comes to understanding the brain and doing this biological unit for AP Psych. So hopefully it made sense. If it didn't, go ask some questions to your teachers.